다 다자 먼저 좀 첩식으로 다는데 다자 다다 봐 망조 가는 로 가야지 단 점니 군세리 점니 참을로 다 첨비 미지 네베 차로도 여도 유지리디 얘네 강다 망조 타는 로 돼야지 다 약수 차되기 하래 자 드네 뭐 인도잖아 아주 배가 있네 점니 찌도 첨비지 그런 거 로 가야 돼 샤케시 모리
His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama began planning for a future democratic Tibet years before the Chinese invasion. By the mid-1950s, he had established a number of committees to implement a series of land, tax, and other political reforms. He found inspiration during his first visit to one of the world's youngest democracies, India.
nga tumi sheke mari di ine kyaa chozol dawa chinche aji thombre sa 다 뭐는 전에 그 라와 담주 라와 지금 망조시대한테 커져지 그게 가서 우리 개선해야 돼. 그 치선 낭세 채토야. 네. 나한테 모서기야 그렇죠.
But before the young Dalai Lama could bring his vision of a democratic Tibet to fruition, China's of his country forced him to seek refuge in exile in the March of 1959. The government of India generously opened its doors to him and the 80,000 Tibetans who spilled over the Himalayan passes fleeing persecution. His Holiness the Dalai Lama faced the daunting task of being responsible for the welfare of this huge refugee population and to find ways to provide them with education, housing, and employment while working to preserve the profound and ancient Tibetan Buddhist culture that was being systematically destroyed in Tibet. However, his vision of a Tibetan democracy was never far from his mind. Less than a year after he left Tibet, the 25-year-old leader made his first public announcement of his plans to democratize the Tibetan government. In the year 1960, Tibet's first elected body, the Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies, took their oath of office on September 2nd, a date that is celebrated every year as the Tibetan Democracy Day. On March 10, 1963, the fourth anniversary of the Tibetan People's Uprising, the fledgling Tibetan government finalized a charter that became Tibet's first constitution. The charter is based on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, guaranteeing equality before the law and freedom of expression, assembly, and religion. But along with the modern norms of democracy, the Central Tibetan Administration has incorporated an article that is unique among modern political constitutions: that Tibetan polity shall be based upon the principle of non-violence. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always initiated and occasionally found the need to encourage the Tibetan community to take up democratic principles.
아주 마음에 쩌좀 신지지 söje 디닝도지 배제 주주 리숨로 이메 마사라체베 디나라 겨울무시고 왕제디 아니 그게 계시는 그게 거바로 충분히나 아니 겨울무시 왕제디 두주 단 거야 사지 계시 다 되는 거做래 들이다자
In the first 30 years of exile, the road to democracy was rather slow. All the ministers of the cabinet were still appointed by His Holiness, and there was little financial accountability to the parliament. In the year 1990, His Holiness the Dalai Lama expanded the number of parliamentary members. He gave them independent authority to appoint members of the cabinet and increased their power of legislation, policy making, and financial control. He also sought to give women a greater voice in the government. The establishment of elected local assemblies helped to strengthen democracy at the grassroots level and allowed for the democratic participation of all Tibetans. In the year 2001, His Holiness requested the Parliament to revise the Charter and provide for Tibet's first public election of the Chief Cabinet Minister, equivalent to a Prime Minister.
이네 다지 투주 여련의 주시래. 아니 나도 뭐네 줄이야. 겨울 시스템이 지금 미치기 바야 뱅게로 참모배도 뿡대로 소리 쉐비는 되지 라는 момент 하네 있네. 되냐 그 줄이. 아니 그 지금 가서 그래 떠주고 전에 다외 전에 쉐비네다 간다 차진 상담이 있는 거 아주 별까지 미망 The
exiled Tibetans from the 55 settlements in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, as well as those who had immigrated to countries as far-flung as Australia, America, and Norway, voted on their choice of candidates. It was a daunting task for the Election Commission to oversee a free and fair elections of a people who are scattered all over the world. On the 20th of August 2001, the Election Commissioner announced that Professor Samdong Rinpoche would serve as Tibet's first elected Chief Cabinet Minister. Tibet has now taken its place alongside the democracies of the modern world. The Central Tibetan Administration consists of three bodies: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. The Tibetan Parliament is the legislative body representing Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet. The Kashak or cabinet consists of 8 ministers, including the directly elected Prime Minister, or the Sikyong, is responsible for 7 administrative departments: Department of Religion and Culture, Department of Home, Department of Finance, Department of Education, Department of Security, Department of Information and International Relations, and Department of Health.
Churi legunde chitongop ke ngapchungagu dawa shibe tsengi sabdun la masuri la ani cheden lentos chene unzu nambajiresha churi legunge kyapun la gyabetu som nanglo la gwende tangde yiga geju kegu ta ani tazunga sumge tangde tonda shipshe chikta gyata dunte ge chadigdu churi legunge migutso so de pyogu nangte menyam gyunje da nyam palarso yi shogo thata di ani genku di nganjo de churle gungi nangde yore nangdo rikpe ki tadum ngote chia dene gyuse ki pege ki lirim kala rogram ani tazunga somla digzu ngone rogram khang to tuch nangya dene churle gungi khapong ge rangyo de zenga di 아니 벽이 도가 촉바 아니 딜리 벽 칸체 완나 벽이 죽lalomnya 칸체 데네 다섯 벽이 벤저 칸 아니 노링 벽이 리숑 체경 칸 되게 디차디도
nangsi legong la ken leje shibchu thamba yu ta ledön ki thungshi di kegang chimbo chi yin ba song sa en nga ju de zin chega sum gang la yewa shi sha yu de yang sunam da nyam de de zin zingyo de zin da ne shin ki chi cho de dön de zin che de zin sum gang la yewa chebe tho ni zo dang an ju be mi ti zu ki ani shi cha kha ge ani sa tin da 다가 내신게 죽든 약게 지용게 소남게 리시 털라이나 죽든 약게다 다가 내신게 랑가 랑스 투야기 미유조지 임바송자 엔다 대차라 레드 강지 터니 약게 도단 도메다 세던데 버지유 다 베나 소남 리시 미나 죽든 약게 땅고야 땅 소남 제가 정아 요래 정아들 냠베슬 튕겨 수고 리다 된저게 내든 지용게 터니 낭다 낭메다 아니다 내신게 딱 공로 태베게 터니 공에 태베디 아주 손은 벽을 리라 아니 낭시 레고네 미 숨동 니께서라 손은 다리신도 뷰디기요 대양 게 시제절 공로 태바 공로 굽주니 갸 렘바솔라 아니 믹세게 아주게 제된다 아니 툭질 렘베게 천당 손은 다리 고모 든동 앞야 로직라 동다 굽주 도스피티게요 대신 대 토라 강의 최수시 다 견고 상랑다 된소리 디릭 디 차장지 간저 계속 강카라 세그 내멜 송게 토라 아니 나시 레고네 튕겨 시대요
페메 딕조기 벤조 레고데 찔러지던 것도 두주르고 진당압에 체니 사고닌 녀조다 녀조 행가랑 게 모두 온주 나머지 레샤 디게 공라야 아니 벤조 레고나 행가 모두 요 말이니야 즉 속중경 모두네 벤조다 대외기 잘난 게 어찌 레샤 근데 내단 레샤스 또 통마 벤조 레고디 온주 나베 값소 맞아다 마스네 쇼바이네 디다 흰고로 돈다 두주 되니다 곱게 계주 괜히 차고도 디네 갈래 야다 페미 게르조기 샨데 페버레 디네 게지 속바 가기로 좀 나와레 디네 벤조 레고 랑길 레규 페이지 총례다 딘데기 대전 조나지 갈리 벤조 레고기라 맞아 네버디 야르게 치메네 단시레샤 데 벤조 레고다 주고에 고 고바 좀제 슈바이네레 야 코랑기다 미규 로지 카레체스나다 페미 딕조기 지용기 레데 두베기 제도 가샤기 벤조 수지 강 여버디 오네 아니 벤조 두고 제드레샤 롱이 탑지 제드레샤 대다 잡지도 선다 레콩가 로고로 문제 비교다 문제 당지 나에게 랭게디에 벤조 레콩기 차디기도 쉬어이 다디 랭게디 두벌라 벤조 레고 라나나 예와제와인다 아주 대신 시जना 예와 제기요래 대신 담보대 잔다디 두개 대신 신이죠래 두개 대신 디 월라 단다 당랑 장위 뒤에기 짜대 쳔바다 라텝 장고 수에기 당도 쳔바 쉬는지요래 문제다 물질 당제기 대신 지요래 근데 단단 것도 대대다 롱이 탑지 지요래 디마인베 샤바지 단다 강종 벤조 샵중 하시는 지요래 근데 단단 것도 차시 대신 세지요래 야 벤조 레고나 근데 단단 것도 라텝 공부 신게 지요래 또디 저 것도 별로 마인베기 배도인 잡조로 촉받아 촉받아 마인베 게르조레게 했던 거 좀 믹제다 뒤에 돼서 우유롱이 나야다 근데 직칭 아주 기타 탭장고 레시스팅 공부 고르는 배대샤 아니 디 롱이 벤조그 롱이 정말 바디기양 찹시기 nenga지 차도 된 찹시기 nen가데 가르 쇼바이나다 배도인 잡조로 와 아주 가족 망아지 유튜버인데 장가된 아주 락템 공부 실내 쟁에 된 적이 장가지 여바이나 다른 아주 배도인 잡조로 디가서 요는 장가 되야지래 페이지 도구도라 아니야 코란저 응응이 샨데 가족랑 바이네게 로직이 샨데 가족랑 바이네 디 차사진 아주 나 배미 딕조기다 지용기 레전도라 도선 당지 되면서 지용기요래
랍도 토마토야데 지동급제 두준 다우 숨베 세 숨라 루트가죠 다 디젤다 림베 미수리 심라 다가나신 칼랭퐁 다슬링 다 롱 두주 제라 다 아주 도스테버타 치나 알랍자 다사 보김 무수리 보김 다가나신 예마 벨롭신소 안 삼보다 두스테 상만 domyum bekavla tacha ngozulapta tukchu rini tu an Gombel after Chutu, Kerbel after she. And the girls is the Lord Tujunal, Labra Yacherchi, Dana Shim, Same that did do the Lopson da, Pubeke, Gumshi, Ki, Rexon, Lord Tuju, Lala Chelia, Jaurum Jacombushi, she so, the Labra Kai Jabe del Tene, and someone of the Yasa, Tubati, Pesha, Zambuli Dinala, Yabjo, Gin the Mantitach, Jude, some soon there, Devichade or the Shuaim. And Dana is a shiri legon chashabitation, shiri legon de Toma, and go to Becabla, and Chidon would get Tuju, Chindajube says Sheila, to Becabla, take up the shiri gale. Kudiling, Vesekan Senta, Kuna Charo Mishi. Toma Shiri Legon Zubagala, Dakunato Mi Galetin Minga, that Dachan Zu Deb Ganzuit and the Lotujuna Yayek and the Chambersonam, that want to Desema with shoots at the that they say Ben Shashana and Zinjon Dese or a share Dese or a Annie Dana She dear. Rojo get dancing, any or Tanya get dancing. Dana she shiri get pundola, that lefshi something chiage dancing. Dina lea, that and do me so the garrison, Jarum che conscious son, dancing duinala, that descent legend or do shiru chadesha. Toma chidon of the Dujula, legenda, that does a lot to Juchela, legend shibu shena. Yoruba, and some gay care, the key choosing of the Carsigosana, Pube look to Dindugashe, Pube, gay rickshaw, gay chulu, cheddar rickshaw, kumshi, somewhat double cab name, and Dikalea, Lojo Yevasamchi, Gomsachoge, the Nena Chumshusi Nani, Ringtan Jeng, Sajeti, Bemoto with the Jena. A Maumba, she yet to look on Shuboke, and Pentobazi, young Babzi, and Sepshra, Shumode, Deza, Shiri Legunge, Gang, Kebe Tony, and the Ganji Tenny. That Yarumje conscious so gay, Kikwati, Legit Same, have some Namda to Nanda, Nashimade, Shui.
They soon Legungi, Lengetso, did Same Cassidy. Juno Honsi Camu Rumachiki, Kujata, Debekita, Lenge, Shisho, permitting Zunani, Ma Lego Chevati, Gonzuteva chatting yore, the Mama Legun, the conjugation yovache, and Tanda Gege Melogansla, and Sito Legun, Sinichi yore, Sito Lensa Dini, Penitsu Sado Penge, to get the Sito Nyarsada, and Sito Lensa, the Dejiki Legun yore. Tin Nanshinki, ya Meglo Lane, Gonzotanda, Desenchi yore, the Denzuriki, Gaganala, De Chubekita, Pemi Capture, Lakis, Soyatang, Devatoni, Tin Nanshi, the tapes there was several identity certificate, Kije, Chige Ping and Tanti Yadani, Lago to Himachel, Dharamsalanga Kure, together, and Gagane turned back Kablaya. Exit permit Shuyata, that the Yagashundan and Yagashunki, Timlu Konde, Goikilki, Tachik Peba, Sejo Pimichik, Yama, Chige Tonyeta, Gagatingeta, Tinteki Lakita, and David Tony, Desenchik, your race to Shuai. The Netanda Nelenka, Nelenkanti, Tangan, Sami Kinseri, any Nelenkanti, Dharam Salala. Ye, J. Antony Tiki Kawonla, Yagate and Payula, Nelete to Kanki, any Nelekan, Yagale Chigori, Tina Shinki, any Delila Chigori.
And it Chitil Hankan, the Migusobo de Pemitikzuki, and it Chite, Tita, Nigi, Miguda. Ledun Tobiaki Chedo, and Langa Chibujik Chati Yore. Any Denane, Tanda Zodi, Gagata, Chige Kaki, any Chige Yudu Kaki, any Mina Shunde Mina, mitente ta dinashi trozo tumi ani dinashi pedin capture soger kha ta teganashi pedin thonyerche tenzo nyamdalaya an nganzu teba chene ani mi capture thoptap che de chikcha de yore and de the chochung ani nganzu phe nangki ta zara gi neda dinashi phe ta chinani la yobeki ani nganzu nezu khari yobati ani geje tenglare and phemi chizo thoila ya nganzu gi ani kento gi chele ya nganzu khabe mitende che gi mi tanda chite da theta lenge tende chik cha de yore and tanda nganzu gekap choksom la ya nganzu mithenjo lego yoba cha de yo ta lekhung da khapo tanda kuzap thangang gi nang la ya dombe gi leje gi thangdi gyada shipchu shechik cha de du
ta thode legon di chulchi dong gyaju gyalchi lolya ane kyamgurumche kaloblanden dang kasha ge ane unzu nangwachre ta lo sumju sodang di nanglola kalon rimba ni shoes chibjuna yore thunji rimba chubdun spesha cheza dige di changma ge ta chika kule kyonsa mi yu do di ane zenjo la pepe payu yaga tu dige ki nanglo pemi chode che dige dige di thoma mi yu ki nanglo la ta nga zu lu gi kunget ane chika karso nawa chawa ane chika dige le ya menju che ane rimbe kar di du thoma lega che kabla ane leje kansums chiki tugen sheba to shongsha dine chubdun shongsha ane tande chala ta ngabju ngatang yore ane sane la ya ta thuden kya gongonga lopta chiki yore di ane dene sane ki menga che denga chungnis chiki yore di dige ki leje ane dene shija chunga ka la ya nganzo ki gode menga chunjun dine yore kyon dom ane thuden legung u dang sane dombe leje sungya chas chiki ane mimang ki chuzo thuden ya tuben soya ki chedo chale shuedaba dosre
먼저 가왔음 나로네 아니 지금 디 야게 직디 진용 가샤 차되고 요래 엔 진용 가샤 나로래야 저림 시선 셔베 있는 시경 직당 아니 망탈라 관련 뒤 도시네 담슈고 요래 아니 관련 예 단행가 메도 먼저 지 추리려고 나시려고 시리려고 벤줄려고 아니 대송려고 단 최대려고 스도 셔제 chirili wonsi dusheni kada tatlenga dyunchebe kalonjeri chen dusheni sigyong mingtön ani trozogi medhunani yamena gawanawin damtugo mare ani gawachungayini ulugo yore gawamachungayini chimeng damtugo yore tiyu sama direcheche damni tanga jugi lenge nalone zo ni chadigi yore chigdi ani pyoye kanyo seadi takin kecheshudan 랭귀 지슈들이 셴바디다 미망 되던 다이즈리 대해서 뭐지 용가샤기 레든 지쇼디 아니 간을 넘어서다 레지소 상물로 투몽고 토네 원여무 체체에 나가셔고 기대다식 점리 셴바기 지슈다 지고시간에 신슈에
The cabinet can introduce bills and motions and participate in deliberations but has no right to vote. Finally, the Supreme Justice Commission functions as an arbitration court within the parameters of Indian law, handling civil and administrative cases.
제도 팀시강 게 단다 와라 샤몰라 단다 팀시바 고르주 팀시바 체 아니 산이 팀시 강라니 여레 아니 산이 팀시 강라 단다 다대차라 산이 팀시 강 숨차도 제도 팀시 강라 네 쳔바도 니 팀들
The three independent bodies of election, audit, and public service commissions ensure fair elections, fiscal accountability, and procedural transparency.
위두슈아리 인터넷 지도 현조 나로네게 소도 소신이 위두도선 슈아리 인터넷 산에리아 차점비임비나 산에 주민 손도리 인터넷 산에 군진 다나 신기 란전 소중 인터넷 장디게 딱한다 용조디 먼저 위두 udugi ledun yongzo di genrab di udu legun dusni nang yoris ndi shwayi je tande chalia ta jig sane lia chachumbe imbina sane na lolia sane udu legan tangship shibin dusni yori sane udu legan shibin dige digi ngda jig zo jig udu ledun yongzo lagor da sane de dewe udugi ledun dige yongzo genti in kanda sane udu genzine dusni shigi yoris ndi shwayi
legun kha chibo mayimba ani nyamre kha ki nedare labra kha ki nedare ngaro so nyamre kha ki nangge chongle ki nedare ge de ngazo thanda tati gi yore an de shu so je nyamre chidun sokbe ki nedare de ta gi yore labra kha ki nedang khan la ta gi yore ji de khanda bebe ki nedang thanda ngazo jenchul yob de ge chasan chik ani jishib legun gi jishib che do kala pheje da shipkya ge ji gi desen chik cha yum do kala ngazu kindadan khaleta rimbe dusine yarge chinte yure
leji demgul hanga se di thoma chirjidong gubja thukju thambe gi chindo gubi chube gi che shingi modeliya ani leji phabyu chidon nangjog in chingge gi legun sun thoma dusine kunju nasha di chirjidong gubja dunju thonsum gi loliya ani dishi dusin maliya tembe dusin na ani takanda jig legungos tu sube nedan tu chade yori ani legun digi ta lengen zorab di chedim tunze gyada chumi ni nalolia ta seven shin chechini sishu leji zolia jongdar re dagna shin gi sishu leji sargor re tinegi phogelia topda tine lengen tinzu tolia ta kanda jigi dishi sogu che di zo legun digi ta kanda lengen tu sinri.
The parliament, known as the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, meets twice a year in March and in September and is responsible for the accountability of the administration on political matters and social welfare. The parliament also ratifies policies and has the power to impeach the heads of the independent bodies, the justice commissioners and the cabinet. Apart from the business inside the house, the Tibetan Parliament also advocates for the cause of Tibet around the world, visiting and receiving parliamentarians from various governments and organizing conferences such as the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet.
A Syrian-Armenian poet said,
The parliament members regularly visit the Tibetan settlements and bring public grievances and suggestions to the notice of the administration. When Parliament is not in session, the 11-member Standing Committee meets twice a week to deliberate on day-to-day issues. The Public Accounts Committee, Budget Estimates Committee, and other special committees are constituted from time to time.
Chimti shisung ki pime tutu yongne chade chayare lekung mala da chebe pake kature kayure tige samalo chitu gyulene ani tebet na goguyore kature na goguyore di shisung ki da jagar ne sang ke khap jagar ki nang lo liya ani jagar tu so katu su be ne ani pudun shudu ki lingu di gyulek to ne nang goguyore dine ani di cheliya da sane tuzo kha di chidu ki tegar tangching wol yudu sane tuzo kha ge lendong kha la ani chik tuship ki tone le pe ni go ge lamdön phu go ye di gyule ge tone tus phu yore.
There are a total of 38 local assemblies and 77 Tibetan freedom movements in India, Nepal and Bhutan, which are being administered by the Tibetan Parliament in Exile. The Secretariat, headed by the Secretary General and the staff, carry out all administrative functions, including documentation and dissemination of parliamentary procedure under the guidance of the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker.
anda ta chi logo lentom ki trezo kap ni ti chodu samba ani choktung lego ne ta chondu nga ji ki ta khon la chok ta ta ya ne je yik je thati che ya ani chondu chobe kap la ani ji yik je thangma thati sa go ya ani ni re trezo na lenglu khasura tamshe na ka changma ma yik dol phapje ani chokdi che ya ta ti so ji khe je ani ji logic charge chondu ni to khudi che ya de re.
Members of the parliament are elected by a system that is designed to fit the unique situation of a government operating outside of the country it represents. Members of parliament are not elected based on regional populations such as in a federal democracy, nor on a party affiliation in a system of proportional representation, since the Tibetan government has no political parties. In the Tibetan government system, the three main Tibetan provinces are represented by the same number of members, irrespective of the size of the population of these provinces, in a system that is similar to the way that the United States senators are elected to the Senate. Every 5 years, general elections are held for the members of parliament and the Sikyong in one day all over the world, except inside Tibet. Lay and the ordained Tibetans in India, Nepal and Bhutan collectively elect 10 members from each of the 3 traditional provinces in Tibet, Yuzhang, Kham and Amdo. In addition to voting on their provincial representatives, the Tibetan clergy are allowed to elect 10 more members, 2 from each of the 5 religious traditions, Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, Geluk and Pön. Tibetans in North America elect 2 members, so do Tibetans in Europe. 1 representative is elected from Australasia. A fairly recent development is for the members of parliament to be given the responsibility of earmarked territories in exile, so they can look after the interests of those constituencies. Thus, a member of parliament who is elected by the people from central Tibet, for example, can also look after the interests of Tibetans who are living in an area of South India, regardless of the Tibetan region that the member of parliament is from. Over the decades, His Holiness the Dalai Lama increased the amount of responsibility that he gave to the elected Tibetan leadership. And since the first democratically elected Kalan Tripa, or the Prime Minister, in the year 2001, His Holiness the Dalai Lama had described himself as being in a semi-retirement from Tibetan political affairs. Gradually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama announced the devolution of his political role and his complete retirement from political life. On March 11, 2011, His Holiness issued a statement addressed to the Tibetan Parliament, informing his decision to devolve the political authority to the elected leaders and advised to make necessary changes in the charter to relieve him of his political authority. The 14th Tibetan Parliament in Exile unanimously approved in its session to plea His Holiness the Dalai Lama to continue holding his political authority. A number of petitions and requests were put forward by the Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet, including an appeal from the Tibetan Parliament in Exile requesting His Holiness to continue his role as the political leader of the Tibetan people. But His Holiness declined and clarified his stance during a public teaching on March 19th.
방도랑 가시 조신 뽑아서네 경왕기 벽 추신이 우치 있어야 돼. dobso 잡나 신도 해버려. 미수찌기 셔야 야말. 띵내 타제 도그래. 내 타제. 다 벽이 첩시기 랭겐디 망주톤의 위두체베 구치기 왕차 쌍막히는 거야지. 마도 내대 지금 그게 간다 이제나 야름치야 무튼이 지금 첩시기 구치 임베 남바드 레다나 지 슈구직 하대베 소리 차이. 뒤당 내봐도 규주 땅거리 규주 땅에 뒤에 안 들레베 소리도. 자 뒤에 인데 딘데가 타네 메만 그 감으로 챘네 여대베 달라라면 디커도 때다 룩니기 우치리사게 추시니기 우치리사데 다 참샤샤나 베 시지 데베타네 아다 나도 남주 손도도 사베 거돌이야 손도 저서 손도 슈그르 때 손도 개강 안에 저리 있어도 와 와다 뒤는 시체네 장하바네 마 추시니기 우치체네 다 로시비 하서 심버데 다 개강 안에 잠샤 중나 시지르바
His Holiness made it clear that although he was relieving himself from any direct political involvement as relating to the laws and legislation of the Tibetan government in exile, as the Dalai Lama, he would continue to serve as an active spokesperson for the Tibetan cause.
nga 강점배 유미차대요래 강점배 사야 주 주남 비미 주남대 용서로라 표집에 더다게 겐티대요. 그래서 nga 차샤네 표주 남된기 미 재직 차대요. 도면 암도 유는 연배 배바시 차대요. 강점배 차대요. nga 뭐시부도 겐데 예버와.
건설정근 좀 쳐. 아니 배도 배미 근소다. 아니 배미 뭐도 지진 천지 텐데 이마인데 빼나가서 고도 기반하기 ndamiheba te logic shunrobre region re pemengende chele to bayinde ne ngazo chatting tenzen tombi nolola ane tenzen sumchi sanju shure tenzen tombo de pemed de somche yarja ta chedo riyo rine je sonsho tabe ta pek tsaden dodo jin chen ane pemeda pemed jinzu ki leden konchi tola kalo lamden da kuja nonjo ne tenzen nimba de Constitution 좀 초기 개간 남지 겁다 아니 고치 남게 손대 남힐라 베지자된 도도진 셈비 아니 레데 계지 토라 베미 진주도 아니 베미 모기 체도 아니 저조도 가샤게 공비 제길 공자 노조 된저 손바데 베미 진주도 베미 모기 체도 자시 우치 넘바 아니 내가 너희게 내 미나카 jantre 고들다 ne kahyagi konzu shebe kuzob tenje tang mese kuzob nala konza shonge chimo choki kuzob jinsene zajo tenreshene ngazo tenze sum de sanjo hyotoba shongere ne ngazo shilo nyedon kyujiki shinda ngabigi tsenyegi tsagune zanzin ladar hyore ne konza shonge chimo choki ta goba junze tumala zine mozo suza noa na hingi ngazo pemi yanji 모지 탑던다 경구르닌가 야마라베 토네 론스 쳇톱가야데 개체모 차데레.
The 14th Tibetan Parliament in exile decided to form a charter review committee. Consequently, the second Tibetan National General Meeting was convened from 21st to 24th May 2011. The meeting discussed the amendment of His Holiness's political authority in the Charter and decided to plea His Holiness to at least continue holding political authority in a ceremonial capacity. The 14th Tibetan Parliament in exile convened an additional parliament session to make the 25th Charter Amendment to transfer all political authorities of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the leaders directly elected by the Tibetan people and the democratically elected leadership. On 29th May, His Holiness the Dalai Lama signed the document formally transferring his temporal authority to the democratically elected leaders. The Parliament approved the change of name Tibetan Government in Exile to Central Tibetan Administration and the motto on the official emblem Gande Poda Chole Namgel to Demba Nyi Nambar Gelgyurchik. With the amendments in the Charter, Kalun Tripa will approve and promulgate the bills and regulations passed by the Tibetan Parliament in Exile. Likewise, the Kalun Tripa will appoint not more than 7 Kaluns for his or her cabinet to be approved by the Parliament. Oath of office administered by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be commissioned by the Chief Justice Commissioner of the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission. Convention of biannual parliamentary sessions and additional sessions summoned by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be summoned by the Tibetan Parliament in exile. Similarly, as per the need, the Kashak, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in exile may call a special general meeting of Tibetan public, which was previously done by His Holiness. The Chief Justice Commissioner, other two Justice Commissioners of the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission, and heads of the autonomous bodies appointed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be voted by the Tibetan Parliament in exile. If the requisite quorum is not met, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker can postpone the parliamentary session for more than 7 days, which was previously done in consultation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The outcome of popular referendum initiated through the Central Tibetan Election Commission has to be signed and announced by the Sikyong, which was earlier done by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The 15th Tibetan Parliament in exile amended the official title of Kalun Triba to Sikyong political leader, and the strength of the members of parliament was increased to 45. Dr. Lobsang Sengye became the first Sikyong of the Central Tibetan administration after the charter amendment on the 8th of August 2011 and served as the Sikyong for 2 consecutive terms from the year 2011 to 2016 and the year 2016 to 2021 for the 14th and the 15th Kashak. On 27th May 2021, Pemba Tsering, the current Sikyong of the Central Tibetan administration, was sworn in as the Sikyong of the 16th Kashak by the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commissioner. The transfer of all political authorities of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the leaders directly elected by the Tibetan people vests in them the competence to represent all Tibetans in Tibet and in exile, and to fulfill their public service. When the opportunity arises, the present government will dissolve and a new one will be formed with the participation of Tibetans from both inside and outside Tibet.
Lord